All right, so let's get right into it. We're going to talk about the founding of New Mexico, and, the story might not be exactly what you've always heard.
So if I were to ask you point blank, when was New Mexico founded, what's the first date that pops into your head?
I'm willing to bet a lot of you would say 1598, right? That's the year Don Juan de Oñate showed up. It's the date you see pretty much everywhere in all the textbooks.
But what if I told you that the real story, the one about the families that actually stayed and built the place, doesn't really start until 1609? Yeah, a full decade later. That's when the true foundation of Spanish New Mexico was laid.
So, what gives? What happened in that decade-long gap? Well, it turns out we're really looking at a tale of two beginnings. The first one, well, it pretty much failed spectacularly. But the second one? That's the one that actually stuck.
And this right here, this comparison, really lays it all out. Think about it. 1598 was basically a private business venture, like a startup from the 16th century. It was all about finding gold and silver, personal gain. It was, let's be honest, an intrusion. But then you look at 1609, and it's a whole different ballgame. This was a royal colony, backed by the King of Spain himself. The goals shifted completely from getting rich to evangelization and, crucially, figuring out a way to coexist.
Okay, so to really get why 1609 became the real starting point, we gotta understand just how badly the 1598 expedition failed. And I mean, it was a total bust.
The official paperwork, the contracts, they were full of lofty language about spreading Christianity and making friends. But this quote from someone who was actually there in 1602, it just cuts right through all that. He says it plain as day. The greed of these riches, which is silver and gold, is the main bait that attracts us here. They were looking for the next big score, another Aztec or Inca empire filled with treasure.
And Oñate, the guy leading this whole thing, he went all in. We're talking a personal investment that would be worth over $20 million today. Can you imagine? He bet the entire farm on finding gold in the desert. And the result of all that searching, all that money? Nothing. Zilch. Not an ounce of gold, not a sliver of silver. The whole enterprise just collapsed. Oñate was left broke, and in 1607, he resigned. The dream was dead.
But here's the thing. It wasn't just a financial disaster. It spiraled into a deeply human and moral crisis. And it all came down to one of the most basic things you can imagine: food.
Okay, just picture this. You have over 500 people. We're talking soldiers, yes, but also entire families with kids, plus all their staff. And they've all been dropped into this high desert environment that is completely foreign to them. They need to eat, right? Well, things got desperate fast. They had actually run out of their own food before they even got to the first Pueblo villages.
And this is where things get really dark. The financial failure turns into a genuine human tragedy. Listen to this account from the expedition's own treasurer. He describes how they survived by basically taking food, maize, from the Pueblo people by force. The way he puts it, it's just heartbreaking. The feelings of the natives cannot be exaggerated. They weep and cry out as if they and all their descendants were being killed. Wow, you can just feel the agony in that. For some of the Spaniards there, this created a massive crisis of conscience.
So let's recap. You've got starvation, you've got the bitter disappointment of finding no gold, and you have this crushing moral weight for some of the colonists. What do you think happened? A mass exodus. Almost everybody packed up and left. That huge group of over 500 people, by 1609, it was down to about 50 soldiers. Just a tiny skeleton crew, holding on by a thread. So that begs the question, right? Who were these 50 people? And why on earth would they choose to stay in what was clearly a failed colony teetering on the edge of complete collapse?
Well, the game completely changed in 1609. The Spanish crown stepped in and made New Mexico a royal colony. This was a huge deal. Suddenly, the motivation wasn't about some private investor getting rich. It was about serving the king and the church. It was a complete and total reset button.
And so, this tiny group that stayed, they stayed for totally different reasons than what brought them there in the first place. For some, it was a sense of duty to the church and to the Pueblo people they had baptized. But it was also something more personal. Real friendships had actually started to form. A new idea was taking shape. Maybe they could survive together.
And you can see this incredible shift in accounts like this one, from a guy named Hernan Martin Serrano. He was one of the 50 who stayed. He talks about how when the Pueblo people heard they might all be leaving, they asked him why. And when they were told that a few would remain, he says the people rejoiced. That just shows you, right? Real relationships were being built. This was a totally different and much more solid foundation to build a colony on.
So this little group, this band of survivors, they're the real start of the story. They represent the true beginning of a continuous Spanish culture in New Mexico. They weren't conquistadors looking for gold anymore. They had become settlers looking to build a life.
And here's why this is so important, especially for people in New Mexico today. If you look at the family trees of so many modern New Mexican families, where do they lead? Not back to the 500-plus people from 1598, but to this small, stubborn group of about 50 from 1609. This is the real genealogical beginning. You'll see names that are still so common in New Mexico today: Archuleta, Baca, Griego, Romero, Varela. These are the foundational surnames. It was these families who stuck it out, and their descendants are the ones who built the culture and communities of the region for hundreds of years. So, when you boil it all down, what's the big takeaway? The real founding of New Mexico isn't a simple story of conquest for gold. No, it's something way more complicated and honestly way more human. It's a story about failure, about adapting to a new reality, and in the end, about survival. It's about putting down the sword and picking up the cornstalk.
And so I'll leave you with this question to think about. How does it change how we see a place, how we understand its identity, when we realize its founding story isn't one of glorious, easy conquest, but one of survival, of cooperation, and of a simple but profound decision to just stay?